Hello everyone, my name is Knox, and today I am refuting Daniel Helser's claim of fact that humans are the cause of another mass extinction that has the potential to kill 100% of life on Earth if our population continues to grow. His supporting claims were that the large human population will deplete Earth's water supply, food production will eventually reach a limit if the population continues to grow, and we are currently using what we don't have. My refutation will contain 1 evidence challenge, 6 reasoning challenges, and 1 counterclaim. In the argument over the secondary claim that the large human population will deplete the Earth's water supply, the arguer created an irrelevant thesis. I believe that he gave sufficient evidence that humans will deplete Earth's groundwater supply. However, I would argue that this is not pertinent when talking about causing a worldwide extinction of all life on Earth or even depleting Earth's entire water supply, because this thesis only affects Earth's groundwater, which is different than water in general. And then his support for this claim is also that by 2050, 2/3 of people in the world will live in high water stress areas, and over the next 2 decades, demand for water will exceed supply by 40%. My reasoning challenge for this data is how it can lead to the conclusion that all life on Earth will die because humans are using more water than we're currently recreating. Because just because we're running out of water doesn't mean that species in places that don't need as much water are going to be affected by that, and subsequently all life on Earth will not die just because we run out of water, because there are places that are fine with very little water supplies. Also, one of his articles used to find this evidence was an article involving statistics on groundwater, and most of these statistics come from one of the other things he used was that groundwater supply would need to increase by something like 40% in order to meet the demands that we are giving. And these statistics are misleading because only 30% of fresh water on Earth comes from the groundwater, according to the USGS survey in 2016. There was no mention of how the other 70% of groundwater could be used to compensate for depleting groundwater. And despite this, I believe it logical to assert that eliminating groundwater resources would only harm the species' indirect connections with it, because, as I said earlier, species in the desert aren't exactly directly affected by groundwater. He also supported this subclaim that our population is depleting the water supply with a statement that 80% of the U.S. water supply is used for agriculture, and I challenge the reasoning that this is relevant to the secondary or major claim in this case. And then my counterclaim for this secondary claim is that there are ways to maintain the Earth's water supply despite groundwater reduction. And most of my evidence comes from an article by Rowan Jacobson, who wrote How Israel is Proving the Era of Desalination is Here, which was published in Scientific America. So all the statistics I'm about to mention are conducted through this article in Scientific America. And so in it states that Israel was the first started their water saving policies in 2007 when low-flow toilets and shower heads were installed nationwide. Then the National Water Authority built water treatment systems that recapture 86% of the water that goes down the drain for irrigation. And then even with these measures, the country still needed to get 500 million cubic meters of water, which it got from its desalination plants, which in total, in a given year, they can create 600 million cubic meters of fresh water, which causes a surplus for the nation, which now they're facing a surplus of water that they don't even know what to do with. And it's also coming up that in the past, desalination was very expensive. However, because Israel is leading the world in desalination technologies, they have gotten the price down to the equivalent of $30 per month for Israeli households, whereas people in Vegas pay $47 a month for their water, and people in LA pay $58 a month for their water. Moving on to his next secondary claim, that food production will eventually reach a limit if the human population continues to grow. The data he stated in support of this claim contained no sources or expert authorities stated to make the data credible, so I challenged the evidence's reliability. He also used data about the effects of growth hormones in food that have what they have on humans as well as fish. But I challenge the reasoning that this data could lead to the conclusion that that alone would kill 100% of life on Earth. Data was also represented for what percent of the U.S. adults are vegan, and I also challenged the relevance that this statistic has towards his secondary and major claim. Moving to the last claim, that we are currently using what we don't have. In support of this claim, he argued that due to the carrying capacity of humans, we would need 3 Earths to sustain us by 2050. And to quote his own source, the carrying capacity is the maximum number of species an environment can support indefinitely, which means if we reach our human carrying capacity, that means we're at the max number of humans possible, which means that our population is not decreasing or increasing, it's steady. So all life is still, or there's still life here because humans are still at their max capacity. So I challenge the relevance to the argument on that one. He also supports the secondary claim of we are using what we currently don't have, with the data that 80% of the world eats insects as a source of protein. And I again challenge the reasoning and the relevance of this data that this data has, and in any way that it can connect to killing 100% of life on Earth. And then, so overall I discussed why some of the evidence that was used was irrelevant and to the express claim, why some of the evidence may have been true, but it didn't support the main claim, and offered a counterclaim that the water supply is a manageable problem. Thank you.
All right, well, your main argument on most of the supporting points appears to be that the advocate overclaimed the issues that are faced by us because of overpopulation when they're talking about mass extinction and elimination of humans on the planet. I think that that's a reasonable argument to make, and on several of the points I can see where the rationality of your position or your answer does make sense. I do, however, think that there are some arguments that are made that suggest that there are substantial problems coming, and I think there are some places where you answer those issues and other places where you don't answer those issues. The preview that you provide is okay. I don't think you need to preview the different kinds of responses that you had. You said, I'm going to have 1 evidence challenge, 6 reasoning challenges, 1 counterclaim. You don't need any of that. Just tell us what the arguments are as you get to the individual points. You signposted the first point pretty clearly. You do ask a question at one point, how is this going to mean that all life is going to die as a consequence of this? I think that that's a reasonable question. The data on groundwater, I was wondering where you were going with this, and then you finally provided a statistic that says only 30% of the water that we use comes from groundwater. So now I see that there is a reason why your challenges on the groundwater issue seem a little bit more relevant. And then I thought that you did a nice job suggesting that it ignores that there are potential alternative sources of water, either through conservation or through desalinization processes, both of which are illustrated by policies that are in place in Israel, and you had some nice economic comparison also to show that that's practical, which seems to suggest that water issues are potentially not that they're not non-resolvable, that there are ways to address those particular points. I think that you would need to make a more general argument about that as opposed to just relying on that example and for us to make the inference from that particular point. On the second point on the food issue, we're back to the same press. Well, how is this going to mean that the whole planet's going to die? I do think you have a reasonable challenge on the notion that, so what if 80% of the population eats insects, and what the percentage of vegans is? How does any of that apply to the argument that the advocate's presenting? That's a good reasoning challenge. I'm not exactly sure that you have an argument on this, but you have good questions here. And then on the last point, when you're talking about the carrying capacity, that's where the insect issue comes up again, and its relevance is not clear to me at all. I think there's plenty of information to suggest that we've had these kinds of claims in the past, that there are technological solutions, that the problems are sometimes overstated, and that the notion that they are related to mass extinction is problematic. That's the one that you kind of rely on the most to make your argument here. And it's a reasonable press, but if the advocate had modified their proposition a little bit, I'm not sure any of your arguments would be disputing any of the things that they were saying. It's only because they've got such a sweeping statement at the beginning that it creates a problem for them. All right. Thank